What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to White Sox Daily. I'm Aaron Feely once again. A little bit more White Sox news today. Not a great deal in the way of any sort of off-season acquisitions. The White Sox a little bit quieter today, but had a couple over the last few days. Still looking forward to what they're going to do with the remainder of that money that they were able to save in shipping off Luis Robert just a few days ago to the New York Mets. And as part of the White Sox youth movement that they've got brewing right now, ESPN recently releasing an article that gave Chicago a bit of a favorable comparison. So we'll go ahead and jump right into that and our thoughts on the comparison and how they shape up with this team. But basically, the article was talking about 5 teams that are poised for a breakout, posted by Bradford Doolittle. And he had a specific comparison at the top. Now, we've seen a couple of articles where the White Sox rank in top 5 breakout candidates. Potential positive seasons, potential increase in wins, all sorts of stuff like that. This one specifically, though, draws a direct comparison, saying that he sees in the 2026 Chicago White Sox a real potential to be the new 2022 Baltimore Orioles, who of course had that major jump after going 52 and 110 back in 2021. The very next season, they had 6 top 100 prospects at the beginning of the year. Each of those guys would end up on their major league team before the season was over. And they ended up going 83 and 79 as the season wore on. It was a huge jump for the Baltimore Orioles, a massive success by basically every metric you could possibly think of, and of course ended up just missing the playoffs. And that's where he sees this Chicago White Sox team this year being a team that could potentially make a huge jump toward being in that general area of maybe flirting with getting above 500 this year, but then ultimately missing out on the postseason. I think a lot of White Sox fans, even though, the consensus is in sports, you should always be shooting to be world champion. Every season, you're aiming to be World Series champions. The realistic model says it's probably just not going to be the case. You can shoot for it. That can be, the players, the coaches, that should be their goal heading into the season, because if that's not what you wake up in the morning as a competitor, then what are you doing? As fans, where our mindset is, doesn't really have an actual impact on the team itself. So we have the freedom to be a little bit more realistic with our expectations. And I think realistically, being a team that competes for a playoff spot, tries to get to or above 500 this year, even if you ultimately end up missing the postseason, would be viewed as nothing short of a massive success for the White Sox in 2026, especially considering, in this comparison to Baltimore, who were propped up by a huge youth movement of top-end prospects, what that ended up leading to. Obviously, 2023, they won the American League East, a very stacked division overall. They won over 100 games. Then in 2024, they went back to the playoffs again. Obviously, last year, then they took a step back, but they're a team that kind of feels like even with a down season, they are still well within the middle of their contention window. And to be put into a position like that, I think would absolutely be precisely what the Chicago White Sox are looking to become. And another thing that the Chicago White Sox are apparently looking to become is an Arena League football team, or whatever it is that this is going to ultimately lead to. But as you can already probably tell, I'm not a massive fan of it. I don't really like this in any professional sports. When you get some of those minor league sports, some of those lesser league sports, it's necessary. Even in some other bigger sporting leagues like the UFC, NASCAR, it ends up becoming a prominent thing, and I've always found it ugly in sports, and I really hate it in team sport uniforms, especially when your uniform already looks really nice. The Chicago White Sox have some of the best looking uniforms in pro baseball, and yes, I get it. All this is about a new sponsorship patch which will be worn on the sleeves of all the White Sox uniforms in 2026, their home, road, and all of their alternates. In each of the uniforms, it will be placed on the sleeves on the outside. It's not a massive eyesore. You can ignore it if needed, kind of like how the Chicago Bears had the Virginia McCaskey patch on their chest this season. Wasn't necessarily something you couldn't get used to, but when you see it, when you're paying attention to it, it is ugly. So is the sponsorship patch, and so is just the concept of a sponsorship patch. You're a Major League Baseball team. You're not, desolate here. You're not trying to pinch pennies at this point, but CME Group has entered into a multi-year agreement to have their patch publicly displayed on the Chicago White Sox sleeve going forward for the next few seasons. So that'll just be something that we as fans have to get used to here for a little bit. Going to be advertisements on the sleeves for the White Sox in 2026, 2027, and potentially for years post that. But moving right along from that, we also had a little bit of an intrigue story come out from Chris Getz. Ended up talking to MLB.com about the evening right before they ended up making their big offseason splash move this year in Munetaka Murakami, kind of talking about the butterflies, the night before, and the general belief that he claims that was both with him and in the White Sox, scouting room altogether in the front office, that it was just not going to be a deal that was going to get done. It was more of a pipe dream for a majority of the offseason, which was sort of the feeling that a lot of fans, I think, usually have about the White Sox and any big name signings, even ones they're connected to a lot of offseason. So it's interesting to hear directly from the horse's mouth that, sometimes the front office guys end up having very similar thought processes to us watching from home and getting, updates from our White Sox apps on our phones. Basically mentioned that he was super excited as it was going down, and while leading up to the negotiations, he wasn't particularly convinced it was something that they were going to be able to get done. As they talked budget with those above him, that was his phrasing on this one. I think we can connect the dots on our own, specifically who he might have been talking about as far as who could allocate some money downward toward that budget. But we've ripped on the ownership enough here on this channel. We can go ahead and move right on along here. It was one of those things where he talked about getting to notify each person after he was finally able to get it done, that he felt giddy after they were able to reach an agreement, looking up and saying, we got him, we actually got him, did that really just happen? And it's kind of just a fun story overall. I suggest going to MLB.com, taking a look at the full article. I'm not just going to go ahead and read all the quotes to you here. I'll have you head on over there, give it a read. It's a great stuff. But yeah, Chris Getz essentially pointing out it started off as kind of a pipe dream. As they started getting closer and closer to the number they wanted, it was beginning to get a little bit more real. And when finally, late at night, they were able to reach an agreement with his agency for the 2-year, $34 million deal that ended up being what he signed for, and it was agreed to. Even before pen went to paper, when they hung up that phone, there was a huge buzz throughout the White Sox building, and that he basically just started running around the office telling every single person that would listen that they got Murakami. Very fun, intrigue story there. Definitely makes you feel good as a White Sox fan to see the excitement and buzz from the Chicago White Sox front office. And then we'll end things off talking about how the White Sox pipeline is looking this particular season. We mentioned yesterday the ESPN Top 100 list came out and shockingly omitted Braden Montgomery entirely. That was certainly a bizarre turn of events in that particular list. But the MLB pipeline list as well, we didn't really go into too great a depth with that one. But the White Sox come away looking real good, with that being the primary top 100 that a lot of people use. If you put a lot of stock in it, the Chicago White Sox tied for third for most players on the top 100 list, tied with the Brewers, Cardinals, Dodgers, Marlins, and Pirates. They end up ranking in the top 5 as well in prospect points from MLB Pipeline. The only two teams with more than the teams the White Sox are tied for in third are the Mariners and the Guardians. And, I mean, little bit upsetting. The Guardians had to be on the positive end of this as well, but you know what? We'll take what we can get. Kind of also features into the Baltimore Orioles comparison from earlier when they had 6 top 100 prospects on their roster heading into 2022. The White Sox sitting pretty with 5, led at the front of that charge by Braden Montgomery, ranked at number 36. They've also got some other big-time guys in that top 100. And yeah, the future looking bright for the Chicago White Sox. What are you guys' thoughts on the Chicago White Sox potential to have a big breakout season this year, like ESPN was kind of projecting with that 2022 Baltimore Orioles projection? The White Sox with the 5 players in the top 100 by MLB Pipeline. What are your thoughts on the patch on the sleeves? Let us know all of that down in the comments section below, and we'll see you guys again tomorrow.